the things I learned so well in my youth. I think I'm returning to those days when I was young enough to know the truth. Now there are no games to only pass the time. No more coloring books, no Christmas bells to chime. But thinking young and growing older is no sin, and I can play the game of life to win. I can recall the time when I wasn't ashamed to reach out to a friend, and now I think I've got a lot more than a skipping rope to lend. Now there's more to do than watch my sailboat glide, and every day can be my magic carpet ride, and I can play hide and seek with my fears, and live my days instead of counting my years.
Hi there, I'm David Brooker, one of the ministers at the Avenue Church of Christ in Surrey Hills, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this online gathering of the Hartwell and Surrey Hills Churches of Christ. The land on which we are located was originally inhabited by the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we express our appreciation to them for their care of the land, assuring them of our respect for their traditions and wisdom and for their elders past, present and emerging. Today we begin a series of gatherings that will focus on the things that give us life, the passions and interests that give life meaning and fulfilment, fun and satisfaction. Appropriately, we begin today with a focus on personal growth. My guests, Michael Kenny and Maria Brett, will talk with us about some of the things that bring light and delight to their lives. The basic premise of our series is that the journey of life is meant to be fun and fulfilling, that we are meant to derive meaning and satisfaction as we travel, and that in gaining meaning, so we give meaning to those close to us and to the world in general. It's a quest to live freely and lightly, and this is what we hope to explore in our July series. I hope you'll enjoy journeying with us. Welcome to today's first instalment.
So catch me if you can. I'm going back.
We light this candle in the belief that God is near, in the hope that we might feel connected to each other and to Spirit, and in confidence that our community can embody the qualities of justice, compassion, and peace that we covet for our world. We search and yet find no meaning. The search for a meaning leads to despair. And when we are broken, the heart finds its moment to fly and to feel and to work as it will, through the darkness and mystery and wild contradiction. For this is its freedom, its need and its calling. This is its magic, its strength and its knowing. To heal and make meaning while we walk or lie dreaming. To give birth to love within our surrender. To mother our faith, our spirit and yearning. While we stumble in darkness, the heart makes our meaning and offers it into our life and creation, that we may give meaning to life and creation, for we only give meaning, we do not find meaning. The things we can't find are the things we shall give, to make love complete and to honour creation.
Matthew 11, 16 to 19 and 28 to 30. How can I account for this generation? The people have been like a spoiled child whining to their parents. We wanted to skip rope, but you were always too tired. We wanted to talk, but you were always too busy. John came fasting, and they called him crazy. I came feasting, and they called me lush, a friend of the riffraff. Opinion polls don't count for much, do they? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Are you tired, worn out, burned out by religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to find real rest. Work with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn from the unformed rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly.
Well, my conversation partner this morning is Michael Kenny. Michael's no stranger to us. You will have seen him playing the clarinet in our gatherings on Sunday mornings, but there's a lot more to Michael than meets the eye, and it's not all about the clarinet. And this morning I'm going to talk to Michael about something that is one of his passions, something that he's engaged in and interested in, and it's about the electronic composition of music. So, Michael, tell us when I say the electronic composition of music, what am I talking about, and how did you get into it?
It's the art of creating music, not with like a clarinet, for example. It's making music on a computer, and and having synthetic instruments, make the sounds as opposed to real instruments. And I enjoy lots of forms of electronic music and music in general, and it's curious to try and say that like I compose or produce, because those terms have gotten very muddied over the years as to like what the difference between, because producing used to mean you mix it down and you sort of figure out how to arrange the sounds, and composing means you write a score, whereas I sort of do a mix of the two, and I make music that's like symphonic, some of it's electronic, some mix in between, some of it's just very weird and bad. But yeah, it's I sort of started back in high school. One of the electives I could do was a music course, and as part of that, it was sort of very basic music theory. But as part of that, we had a whole bunch of iMacs in the room, and we were given free rein to use a application called GarageBand.
Yep.
Which is a very sort of, very beginner friendly, they're called digital audio workstations, or DAWs. And what that allows you to do is you can sort of queue up electronic notation. You can add in like sounds, which are called samples. And you can set them to occur at certain times in certain places. And the second I got onto that computer and noticed this sort of plethora of like synthetic sounds, or sort of vaguely naturally sounding sounds, and all these different things that I could put together, something sort of clicked in my brain, and I was just sort of instantly absorbed and obsessed with it.
And then you're into it from there.
And it's sort of just been this weird sort of hobby obsession in the background ever since. Every now and then I get bitten by the music making bug, and I'll sit down and try and make a song or a piece that sounds
it's a whole new world for people like me. It's sort of amazing. So what's something that you've done that you're sort of, or I guess you're proud of, or that's given you a bit of a buzz, a bit of a sense of satisfaction?
The most recent thing I've done, which has sort of been really, really satisfying, was that I listen, all my friends know that I listen to entirely too many podcasts. I have the opportunity for a certain sort of podcast network to listen to some of their shows in advance, because I pay a membership fee and support them. And they released a preview of one of their new podcasts, which was this sort of quasi game show with this spy theme. And I listened to it, and I contacted the podcast producer, and I said, listen, I am so inspired by this really, really, sort of silly podcast that I can write a theme for it. And they were like, okay, sure, listen, we have a guy. We have a guy. Listen, we'll take your submission, we'll have a guy. And so I wrote this incredibly, very cheesy jazz swing, sort of spy movie pastiche track. And I sent it to them, and they were like, wow, this is amazing.
Goodness.
We immediately want to use it.
Isn't that great?
And so, it's had a couple of episodes out, and I get, every now and then I sort of go onto the members only chat for that podcast, and everyone's like, wow, the routine sounds really good. And every single time sort of like, should I say thank you? Is that self-aggrandizing? But it's, people really like it, and that's sort of, it's probably the biggest thing I've done with this.
That's great. Well done.
It's very
excellent.
It's very exciting. Yeah.
So where does your inspiration come from for creating this music?
It comes from, it really just comes from all sort of that music from all the media I consume. So a lot of it is soundtracks to movies, to TV shows, even video games. I could spend a long time talking about video game music and how it is really interesting and a very particular form of music,
which most people don't particularly consciously listen to because they're watching the video.
Yeah, they're busy watching the thing. But every now and then I'll play a video game and there'll be a moment where I'm not really concentrating. I'm like, oh, this is really lovely. But yeah, I sort of do a lot of like that sort of soundtrack style composition, where it's sort of not necessarily supposed to be like the foreground. It's supposed to be in the background.
Yep.
Yeah. And of course, there's just the general, like, I listen to, a lot of different kinds of music, like, sort of much more like contemporary, sort of rockish, sort of, that sort of indie music. I listen to a lot of electronic music. At the moment, with the current climate, I'm listening to a lot of a very specific subgenre called lo-fi hip-hop.
Wow.
Which, if you've heard one lo-fi hip-hop song, you've heard every lo-fi hip-hop song. But like, there's just enough sort of breathing room in the form for, different songs to be different enough. And it's this beautiful, warm, like, nostalgic.
Goodness.
It's calming, and it sort of chills you out. It's,
wow.
It's delightful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we get to hear some of your music in
Yes.
just a moment. We're going to play one of your tracks. Tell us about it. Where did it come from? What is it? Tell us a little bit about it.
It's actually, I wanted to write something new, but inspiration didn't so strike immediately. So I had to go to my back catalogue, and I didn't realize how far back this was. This is a sort of punch up of a song I wrote at my mother's request 9 years ago. 9 years ago.
Amazing.
And so folks from Hartwell might actually recognize it a little bit, because it was actually played over a communion about 9 years ago.
Okay.
But yeah, so I took the track and I sort of fixed it up. I remastered it, improved the sounds. I've, developed how I make things since then. So I had to, and shortened it a lot. And I hope you really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing it. We're going to hear it right now, effectively.
Yeah.
But I promise it won't be the last time we hear music from you, Michael. It's wonderful to have discovered your talent in this.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing it with us and telling us about it this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you all on this Sunday morning? I hope you've had a fantastic week, and I'd love to say it's lovely to see you all this morning, but unfortunately I can't. So you just get to see me. I'm not sure if that's good luck or bad luck, in honesty. But as we come to the time in our service this morning where we share the communion meal together, there are just some thoughts that I'd like to bring. As I was preparing for this today, I was struck by that verse that Sue's just read to us, that Matthew verse that Sue's just read to us from the Message. And in particular, I was struck by the last segment of the reading, Matthew 11, verses 28 and 30. Let me just read it to you again and just remind you of what it said. It says this: "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." When I read it, it really struck me as a really quite powerful reading. I'd never thought of this verse in the context of these words before. But perhaps more importantly than that, it seemed to jump off the page to me as a promise or an insight that was completely appropriate for where we find ourselves today. This promise to be able to live freely and lightly, how engaging is that at the moment? Or it almost feels fanciful. I mean, how on earth can we live freely and lightly whilst we're locked down in a pandemic? How can we live freely and lightly whilst we're separated from each other, whilst we're restricted in our activity, while we're unsure about our future, and perhaps for many of us while we're fearful? Fearful for our health, fearful for our financial security, even perhaps fearful about a future where those things that we've known and we've valued are fundamentally changed, maybe even forever. Even simple things like, the coffee and the chat that we would have normally enjoyed on this Sunday morning, seeing each other's faces, catching up with each other's lives. In so many ways, living freely and lightly seems a long, long way away from us, maybe even a distant memory of safer times that have now gone behind us, have passed us by. And how could this simple celebration, this act of breaking bread together, how could this possibly speak to the complexity of our lives? The profound uncertainties that confront us now. How could this meal bring freely and lightly to us today? After all, we know that the meal doesn't provide a cure or a shield to this virus. Perhaps we hear some people around about us say, God will protect us as we're his people. But as we look about us, it's clear that this virus is agnostic. It pays no attention to our religion or our gender or our ethnicity or our social standing or so many other things. It cuts across all of these boundaries, equally infecting and attacking whoever it meets. So is this living freely and lightly just a vain hope now? A throwaway line, an empty promise? I went back and I read those verses again, and I noticed just before the promise of freely and lightly, there's another line. What's hinted at in the reading is that living freely and lightly is born in learning the unforced rhythms of grace. What a wonderful line. Almost the sort of line that Leonard Cohen had had in one of his songs, if you're a Leonard Cohen fan. Almost a poetic line. Learning the unforced rhythms of grace. It's a line that feels simple and engaged to me. I don't really know, but I'm guessing that I don't control, probably I can never control the unforced rhythms of grace that are around my life. Hopefully I can recognise and meet these rhythms. Perhaps if I'm brave, I can even embrace and value them. Allow them to change the way that I see the environment that I find myself in. Whatever environment that is, including this environment that I find myself in today that's been brought about by this pandemic. The unforced rhythms of grace seem to speak to me of time to be engaged with you, engaged with my environment, engaged with myself. They seem to speak to me of respect, of finding goodness, of valuing hope, of choosing to make a positive contribution wherever I can. To me, this 24-hour news cycle, which captures and at the moment really even dominates my attention, this cycle which informs me and changes the way I think about both the world I live in and the people I share this world with. This news cycle feels to me like it's devoid of the unforced rhythms of grace. How does it feel to you? I'm going to ask Dave now to play some quiet music. And while the music's playing, I'm going to ask you to use the time to spend a moment just sitting quietly. Try and spot the unforced rhythms of grace that are present in your life, that are around about you right now. See if you can spot them. And if you can't spot them, why don't you name them quietly to yourself? Because if you name them, then maybe you can carry them forward with you in your week. Maybe they can start to inform the way you think about the world and the people who you're engaging in it. And while you're doing this, just quietly, and when the time feels right for you, I want you to just take the emblems, take the bread and take the wine. You don't have to follow any particular tradition, but just take those emblems and in your own time, take them and eat them as an affirmation of your participation and sense of connection, engagement with this community, with everyone else who's on this Zoom this morning, with the people who we would normally see on a Sunday. Just share the bread and the wine quietly with yourself and hold us in your thoughts. And then this week, may the unforced rhythms of grace go with you and assist you to live freely and lightly. Amen.
Well, Maria Brett is one of the key leaders of a group called Connect, which is a midweek group that we have here in the Hartwell community, exploring mindfulness and curiosity in daily life. When I invited Maria to chat with us, I actually suggested that she might want to reflect on her journey with Buddhism. But she came back to me and indicated that her real passion was for the broader area of growth. So we agreed to launch off from there. Welcome, Maria, and thanks for chatting with us this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let's begin. Can you tell me by starting with, what do you mean when you say growth, and why has that area become an area of interest and passion for you?
Well, a little while ago, I was doing some exploration of values. It was for one of our Connect sessions, actually. And I was thinking about what my core values were. And I realised that one was growth and the other is integrity. So that led me to do a lot of reflecting on both of these values. And I think they're connected, because I don't think there's any real growth without integrity. But I'm talking about growth tonight. And when I talk about growth, I guess I'm talking about personal growth. But there's a very interesting paradox in that, because we can all set out on our journey of personal growth. But if it's all about me, I think you're going to pretty quickly hit a ceiling of what growth is really possible if it's all just about yourself. Yeah. So I think this is the paradox. We do actually need to work on ourselves. And there is a bit of a self-improvement exercise very often that we all have to go through in our own way. But ultimately, that's not the goal of the journey. The goal is really about going beyond myself so I can be there, available to support others in their growth. So this is the paradox, I think. We do need to grow ourselves, but the purpose of that is not ultimately for ourselves, it's for others.
Yeah, so the community dimension is important in the process of growth. Yeah. So
absolutely.
So where has the pursuit of personal growth taken you over the years?
Well, it's been a very long and windy journey. And when people hear my life story, they might think it doesn't make sense, because I've been a lot of places and done a lot of things. But to me, it all makes perfect sense. And everything that I've done in my life was always supporting this idea of growth and leading me further along in my own journey of growth. So it really started for me, I think, when I was about 21, and I took off as a young backpacker for my big trip to Europe. And I learned a lot about myself, and sometimes I realized that actually I wasn't a very nice person, and that I knew that I needed to change. And the kind of pinnacle of that long overseas journey was a journey to India on the way back. And I went on my own as a young 21-year-old woman, which is a pretty gutsy thing to do in 1987. But I was determined to go, so I went, and it was incredibly confronting and challenging. And I remember when I was there saying to myself, don't ever forget this, because I knew that I wanted to do something to make the world a better place in the face of the horrific poverty and deprivation and distress that I witnessed in India. I knew I wanted to help make the world a better place. I came back, I changed my major at university to politics, and that was going to be my path. I actually thought I was going to go into politics, and I thought I would change the world through politics. I very quickly became disillusioned, mind you, and abandoned mainstream politics for political activism. And then I did have a little foray into a legal career where I thought I was going to help people, but really I didn't help anyone with that. So I chucked it in, and I went off into the environment movement. And I was an environmental activist for a number of years. I was with Greenpeace and the Wilderness Society. And I have this amazing photo. I should have dug it out to put it on the screen. An amazing photo of me walking up Burke Street to Parliament House, holding this big banner. I'm sort of at the head of the demo, holding up this banner to save the rainforests or whatever it was. And for me, that's a sort of an image of how I remember myself as a younger person when I really felt so passionate about that cause and saving the planet and helping to do that. But I think what happened along the way is I kept bumping up against myself and, you know, and the limitations of trying to change the world when you haven't actually changed yourself yet. And that ultimately led me in my late 20s to Buddhism. And I had a period of about 13 years where I was very heavily and intensively involved in Buddhism. I still call myself a Buddhist, but I'm not so intensively involved as I was at that time when I lived and worked in a spiritual community. It actually took me to the other side of the world. I lived in England in a spiritual community. And that was an intense period of learning about self-growth and awareness, particularly through meditation and mindfulness meditation. And that's still really an important part of who I am and how I live. And it was always balanced by being part of community. So here we were intensively in this Buddhist world trying to develop ourselves, but the Buddhist teaching includes this important element of other, that yes, we need to develop ourselves. The journey to enlightenment is it's us being enlightened, I guess, in a way, but you won't actually crack enlightenment unless you let go, ultimately, of any sense of self. So although people might have a view that Buddhism is all focused on development of the self, it's actually very other regarding. The purpose of that self-development is ultimately to go out to others and lead others to be relieved from their suffering and to find their own path of growth as well. So that was my Buddhist phase. After my intensive Buddhist period, I actually while I was still in that period living in England, I retrained as a psychotherapist. So I trained and worked as a counsellor and psychotherapist, and I did a lot of therapy myself. It was interesting that all these Buddhist friends I had, they were all striving so earnestly for enlightenment, and yet they still had a whole lot of baggage and psychological problems that they hadn't dealt with. And I realized that was true for myself. And this is where the journey is interesting, because I started wanting to change the world, and I kept kind of chunking it back and back to me, that I knew I couldn't really make a huge difference to the world or other people unless I really did the work on myself. And that's where I got into psychotherapy. And I think if I think about tools today that are useful for me, obviously meditation and mindfulness practice is a really key tool, but I think psychotherapy has really helped me as well. Now, I'm happy to say right now I'm not in therapy. I'm relieved to not be a therapy client right now, but I've got a bookshelf full of therapy books, and I dip in and out of them from time to time. And there are many models and ways of thinking about psychological difficulties that I've learned over the years. So those tools are available and ready to me, the tools of therapy. I think the thing about all of that, be it therapy or mindfulness, it's really about awareness, because with no self-awareness, there's really no growth. And I think part of that awareness is a willingness to be open, to receive feedback, to apologise, and to take responsibility for my own actions and my own failings. So they're daily strategies that I put into place, whether it be at home or at work. I really try and bring awareness to everything that I'm doing and take responsibility. So if I spot myself saying something unkind, you know, it's not always easy to be aware, and sometimes I don't spot it. And I know that's true for other people as well. But the more awareness you have, the earlier you can spot those small failings and take responsibility for them. So that might be acknowledging it to yourself, not in a judgmental way. We talk about this in the Connect group all the time, not judging when we notice something has gone astray, just acknowledging and saying, oh, that's interesting, there I go again. So it's acknowledging to yourself, but also to other people. I think that's really important, to talk about it, to not bottle it up, but to be able to say, look, I realised when we spoke about such and such that I was actually a bit worked up and a bit frustrated with you. And I'm really sorry about that. I'm sorry if the way I communicated hurt your feelings in any way. I think just being willing to own up to our failings, take responsibility, never judge yourself for any of it, but be willing to keep moving forward. It's just all part of self-acceptance, which is essential to growth.
Yeah, and specifically the practice of mindfulness or some other reflective practice, what part does that play in that self-awareness and self-reflection for you?
Well, we think about meditation as the mind working directly on the mind. So when we sit down and try and focus on our breath or loving kindness or whatever it is the object of our meditation, the mind is working on improving the mind. We bring our mind back to the breath every time we notice that we've wandered away. So that's mind working directly on the mind. Mm-hmm. In a way, it's considered the most direct and immediate way to personal transformation. There are also indirect methods. So some people prefer to work in the body. So they might do yoga or walking meditation. Now, that is becoming aware through some other activity. That also has great value. There's even mindfulness of doing the dishes. You can be mindful of anything you do, but meditation is the mind working directly to the mind. And it's what the Buddha was doing when he gained enlightenment. So it's the most direct and effective way to transform our own minds. So that's why mindfulness meditation is particularly helpful. And I used to be much more committed to my meditation. I confess that there were two problems for me. One, I went at it way too willfully and pushed myself way too hard. And that really is not the purpose of the meditation. It was what I learned along the way. And I think what was interesting is when I really learned that was not what meditation was about. What I discovered for myself was I needed to stop pushing myself to meditate. So now I can't say that I have a daily practice, although if I ever sit down, I can reconnect with it quite easily and I can kind of reach a fairly still place without too much difficulty. I'm quite used to sitting in a meditation posture and getting into that space. So practice has helped me.
I'm really interested to hear that, because often we hear, the word discipline is associated with our reflective practice, and we have to be disciplined about it and the daily rhythm and all that sort of thing. But you seem to be saying that it's actually about finding a rhythm that works for you, and that without being too hard on yourself and pushing yourself into a rhythm that is artificial.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I actually think it's different for different people, depending on your temperament. So I'm a very willful person by nature. So that was what I learned in meditation, that I had to relax and just let it be. So I would tend to do, these days, I would tend to prefer a meditation that doesn't have much going on. We even have a practice that we call just sitting, where we literally just sit. We're not trying to do anything. We're just trying to sit and be with ourselves. And for someone like me who's so very, very willful, that's quite useful.
Hey, Maria, we could talk for much, much longer than we have about all of this, and maybe we'll revisit it sometime, because we're just about out of time now. Is there one last thing you'd like to say to us before we close off?
I would say something, and it's something out of one of my therapy books, Brené Brown, and people in Connect have heard us talk about, Colin and I talk about Brené, and I think a few different people have talked about Brené at church. But I really love her focus on bravery, and I think I have been courageous in my life, and I would just love to encourage people to be brave, to be willing to have the difficult conversations with people, to be willing to confess and own up to our own failings and take responsibility for them. It can be really painful, but it's always better to talk about it. And I know this from psychotherapy as well. If you bottle it up and don't actually talk about what's going on, it's never better. And I don't think I've ever once regretted speaking up about something, talking about something that happened. Never regret it. It's always better after I talk about it. So I encourage people to be courageous and speak up.
Thank you. What a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for giving us the time and chatting with us. And yeah, we will certainly revisit some of this, and people can connect with the Connect group every first and third Wednesday evenings, and information will be in the friendly word and the what's on. So yeah, people will be welcome to join in.
Yep, I look forward to hopefully seeing some new faces very soon at Connect.
Excellent.
And thanks, David, so much for the invitation to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. Catch you later, Maria.
Okay, bye.
Have you ever watched an ice block melting? Intentionally sat and watched the transformation from solid to liquid take place. It's a little more dynamic than watching grass grow, though perhaps not markedly so. Many of us would lose patience with the ice block, would we not? We want the process to be quick, immediate even. Crush it so it melts faster, or maybe even whack it in the microwave. We do become impatient when change in ourselves and in others is not happening fast enough. We can sometimes be our own worst enemy, our harshest critic. One mistake or one effort that doesn't measure up to our own high standards, and we come down on ourselves like a ton of bricks. I'm useless. I'll never get this right. What will people think of me? Better give up before I make a complete fool of myself. And so on and so on. Our impatience for change applied to ourselves is actually a recipe for anxiety, ill health, and dis-ease. We would do well to learn the unforced rhythms of grace, as Jesus puts it in that passage from Matthew's Gospel. The unforced rhythm of grace is actually what I see in a melting ice block. It will take as long as it takes. That's the way it is, and that's okay. Maybe we can learn something from nature, from creation, about getting in sync with that unforced rhythm. Maybe this is the essence of the Creator Spirit, a gentle but relentless rhythm of creativity, of generative and regenerative growth, a growth that is often imperceptible but unmistakably noticeable. Like the changing of the seasons, not abrupt and finite, but gentle and sort of indeterminate. And, when does winter end and spring begin? And yet we know it will. That the bare branches, stripped of all but the most stubborn of leaves, looking for all the world as though they are dead, will gently yet inevitably show signs of new life. Green shoots giving birth to lush foliage to offer the shade we crave on those hot summer days. Some years ago now, I had the privilege of a conversation with the then Bishop of Sale, Arthur Jones. At the age of 80-something, he was about to conclude his tenure as bishop, and he was reflecting on his experience of ministry. He commented, "I have reached that stage in my life where I am comfortable that I am who God meant me to be." I thought to myself, how good to get to the end of your working life and feel that you are who you are meant to be. But Bishop Arthur continued, he said, "It's not that I have suddenly reached that point or that it marks the end of my becoming, but rather that I have finally come to the realization that at any and all moments in my life I was and am who God intends me to be. I may recognize areas for growth and development. I may even let myself down from time to time. But that is who I am, and it is always who God wants me to be at that moment in time." Wow. Could that be what Jesus had in mind when he urged us to learn the unforced rhythms of grace? To learn that who we are meant to be at any given time is just the way we are. And to relax into the unforced rhythms of grace and learn to live lightly and freely. One final thing needs to be said. To live consistently within the unforced rhythms of grace is not easy. That niggling voice that tells us we're not good enough, or not who we should be, or not doing it right, or not worthy, or not appreciated, that voice can be hard to quell, especially if we're trying to do it on our own. Which is why Jesus' invitation includes the injunction to walk with me and work with me. In other words, put ourselves in the way of the Spirit, make reflective practice and openness to the Spirit an intentional part of our unforced rhythm, so that our growth, our transformation, might be guided and sustained by that life-giving Spirit. Put yourself in the way of the Spirit. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace, and know that at any given moment you are who you are meant to be. Living freely and lightly, and all is okay. God bless this tiny little boat and me who travels in it. It stays afloat for years and years and sinks within a minute. And so the soul in which we sail, unknown by years of thinking, is deeply felt and understood the minute that it's sinking. Amen.
From the bush to the beaches, the migrant to the indigenous, though girt by sea, we're not isolated. We're the great south land of the Holy Spirit. Through the fires and drought, no virus could ever hold us down, 'cause we were made for such a time as this. So the Lord bless you and keep you, Australia, in the name of Jesus.
Face shine upon you and be gracious to you.
Lord, turn his face toward you
and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations.
And your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations.
And your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations. And your family, and your children,
And the children, and the children.
may his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations.
And your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May his presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you.
All around you and within you, he is with you, he is with you.
In the morning.